Hello, my name's Joe.
And I'm Nick.
And this is a camera comparison of the Galaxy S9 Plus
and the Huawei P20 Pro.
Now today, as you can see, we're in Brighton and it is a lovely day. So we're going to take these both cameras for a spin and see what they can do. We're going to wait till it gets low light as well and just see how both these cameras stack up against each other. At the end, we're going to compare both photos and see which performs better overall and give you a final comparison of which one you should get if you want to take the best photos. So the Galaxy S9 Plus released back in March and it has a dual camera system. Now the main camera is a 12 megapixel camera that has a dual aperture that can change from f1.5 to f2.4, and this does feature optical image stabilization. Now the second camera is a telephoto lens that is also 12 megapixels but is an f2.4 lens. You get a 2x optical zoom with this, and the main camera can also shoot in 4K at 60 frames per second. Both sensors feature optical image stabilization. The front-facing camera is an 8 megapixel lens and can film in 1440p at 13 frames per second. The Huawei P20 Pro released earlier this year, and its main sensor is 40 megapixels at f1.8. This does have optical image stabilization. Meanwhile, the second lens is a monochrome sensor that is at 20 megapixels and comes in at f1.6. Finally, the third camera is a telephoto lens at 8 megapixels f2.4, and this gives you a 3x optical zoom. Now, all three sensors have optical image stabilization, and the main sensor can record at 4K at 30 frames a second. The selfie camera is 24 megapixels, and that can record in 1080p at 30 frames a second. Alright, we're on Brighton Pier now. We're just going to find some subjects to take pictures of and test the front and rear facing cameras of both of these phones.
This is a test of the rear-facing camera for the Huawei P20 Pro. We are currently filming at 4K at 30 frames per second, and this is just providing some insight into the microphone, the video, and the stabilization of the camera.
Alright, so this is currently a test of the Galaxy S9 Plus. We are currently shooting at 4K at 60 frames a second, and this is a test overall of the stabilization and microphone of the device itself. Obviously, we're in Brighton, it's quite loud, so it's quite good to see if the phone can isolate my voice from the rest of the footage that I'm taking at the moment.
Okay, this is a test for the front-facing camera of the Huawei P20 Pro, and we're currently filming at 1080p, and this just gives some insight into the stabilization and the microphone, how it picks up my voice in a busy environment.
Alright, so this is currently a test of the front-facing camera on the Galaxy S9 Plus. There is Nick, and there is cameraman Dan over there. And so this is just a test to see what the quality's like. We're currently recording in 1440p, and it's just to see if, first of all, my voice is isolated in this noisy environment, and just to see what the stabilization's like, because obviously I'm walking, and we're just going to see how that goes. Alright, so we've finished taking our daylight photos with the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus and the Huawei P20 Pro. So now we're going to wait till it gets low light and see what these phones are really capable of.
Then we're going to go home, compare the photos, and we'll give you our final verdict.
Right, so we're going to start off our camera comparison here with a picture of Brighton Pier. Now, it's worth noting the P20 Pro photos will be shown first and the S9 photos will be shown second. So in this first picture you can see that the P20 Pro retains overall more detail in the rocks at the forefront of the photo. The outlines of the clouds are more visible themselves, whereas for me personally on the S9 Plus they seem to be a bit more joined together and a bit more harder to work out. In my opinion, the P20 Pro is also more aesthetically pleasing, whereas the S9 Plus may be slightly more true to life. So again, here it's about more your personal preference rather than anything else.
Okay, so our second picture here is a portrait mode shot of our cameraman Dan, and so the P20 Pro is helped here by its wider field of view, but overall I do think the S9 Plus does a better job in capturing Dan and making him stand out from the background. There are some parts of his skin on the P20 Pro that are a bit more washed out, and it's harder to sort of work him out from the background. But I do think it's worth noting that both cameras in this situation didn't do a fantastic job of capturing Dan and the details present on his jumper and his beard. So our next picture here is of the Brighton Pier sign. I do think this picture especially does demonstrate how capable both cameras are. I think in terms of the clouds in the background, the P20 Pro does a good job in separating them a bit more. In both images, the subject, which was the sign itself, is incredibly sharp. For me though, the P20 Pro does edge it slightly here. If you look down, the green Palace of Fun sign is slightly less blown out and is a lot more legible on the P20 Pro rather than the S9 Plus that seems to blur it a bit more. But overall, the pictures on both are incredibly capable, and I think again it does come down to personal preference. Obviously both of these cameras are using a lot of software tricks to produce the final image, and it will just come down to which one you prefer at the end of the day. Now we were in Brighton, so of course we did take advantage of the donuts that are on sale. So the P20 Pro here managed to separate the colours on the shot slightly better, whereas the S9 Plus I think makes everything look a bit too orange. The P20 Pro did a better job with shadows in my opinion, and it also captured a more true to life colour of the bench itself. Whereas to me it almost seems like the S9 Plus, the orange present in the donuts, has sort of transcended onto other subjects and made them a bit brighter and sort of overemphasized. That's something that makes the P20 Pro shot in this instance edge out the S9 slightly in my opinion. Now we have got another portrait mode here, this time of Nick, and I do think the P20 Pro's wider angle does really help in this circumstance, but also I feel like the details on Nick's face look slightly better on the P20 Pro. If you look, his stubble is slightly more detailed and overall comes out a lot sharper. The S9 Plus seems to have done a better job in adding a bokeh effect at the top, whereas you can see the P20 Pro kind of misses his hair at the top there, whereas the S9 Plus sort of manages to convey it around the entire subject a lot better. Now, taking a camera and pointing it directly at the sun isn't always advised, but we thought we'd try it here and just see what both cameras were capable of. So the subject in this instance, we're both tapping on the water. I think the P20 Pro did a slightly better job at producing more accurate colours. I also think the water on it looks a bit sharper. If you look, the windmill farms as well, they're a lot more visible in the background. And I do also think the detail in the clouds is also a bit better as well. Now it's worth noting that the S9 Plus picture doesn't look bad by any means. I think that in this circumstance, it is really just trying to look for the finer details, and I think the P20 Pro does really capture it in this instance. I have a couple of selfies here of Nick on the pier, and so I do think the P20 Pro selfies do look a lot colder than on the S9 Plus. The latter does seem to display everything with a lot more of a warmer tone, and for me that is something that is visually more appealing, especially on the gorgeous screen the phone has. And I also do think the P20 Pro does seem to struggle a bit more with the background in this instance. The S9 Plus does seem to portray it a lot better. There are a lot more colours present, whereas the P20 Pro does look a bit blown out, which is unfortunate. This picture was taken when we were having dinner, so it was around about 6 o'clock and light was sort of starting to fade. And I do think this does particularly emphasise the difference between the two phones. So the focus here was actually of the light bulb itself. And as you can see, the P20 Pro clearly focuses on the subject in question, and it retains huge amounts of details. Now you can notice that the outside of it is a lot darker than on the S9 Plus. But for me, if it's had to sacrifice some of the light on the outside of the shot in order to get more detail on the light bulb itself, that's something I want. Like I said, the subject was the light bulb itself. And I think the S9 Plus definitely struggles a lot more here, and it seems to have just blown out the entire shot, whereas the P20 Pro was a lot more capable in capturing the subject that I actually wanted to in this circumstance. Now I think again this second shot of this burger does emphasize the P20 Pro really comes into its own when light starts to fade. Now you can see the burger on the P20 Pro does certainly look bright. It's very clear and there's a ton of detail retained. Now in contrast, the S9 Plus does look a bit darker, and it seems to be struggling for light in my opinion. And because it's doing that, it's lost a lot of detail, especially on the left hand side of the burger itself. Whereas for me, on the P20 Pro, you can't really tell that the sun's starting to set and, you know, light's starting to fade, for me it's still as light and vivid as it was throughout the day. Again, this skyline picture here is also a good demonstration of the fact that, in my opinion, the P20 Pro is a more consistent camera than the S9 Plus. As we lost more and more light, for me, I was using the S9 Plus and Nick was using the P20 Pro. And for him, he was easily able to just pull out his camera, press the focus button, and just tap away and have a good photo snap for him. Whereas I felt I was taking a bit longer to get the subject in question. Now you can see in this shot, the P20 Pro manages to separate the cloud colors much better. And I do think the P20 Pro overall does look more vibrant. Now, I think the biggest differentiating factor between the two phones is if you look at the Pizza Hut sign right in the distance. Now, the S9 Plus seems to struggle a bit here. It blows it out definitely, making it a lot harder to read, whereas the P20 Pro manages to retain a lot more detail, and just the clarity in the finer subjects is something I do really appreciate. This shot of Brighton Marina in the dark again just emphasises that the P20 Pro really does a good job at taming the light in numerous instances, especially when it's in the far distance. Now if you look at the S9 Plus shot, the light's in the distance, it's clearly struggling with them, and it's just resulting to blowing them out a lot more. Now I think the biggest difference here is in the floor details. Now the P20 Pro manages to capture the individual tiles at the bottom, whereas you can see in low light the S9 Plus is very smoothed over and washed out. And I noticed that this is something the S9 Plus seems to do a lot more than the P20 Pro, especially when it's struggling for light. Now we did take this picture of the Bella Italia sign, just to see if the S9 Plus could try and keep up with the P20 Pro again in low light conditions. But unfortunately the P20 Pro clearly does a better job here in handling the light from the sign and just making it legible in general, whereas the S9 Plus blows it out a bit more and it just isn't as pleasing to look at. Now here's just another nighttime view of the marina shops in Brighton. Now again, it's just a similar story here. The P20 Pro manages to handle the light a lot better, whereas if you look on the right hand side in particular in the distance, the S9 Plus really does do a bad job at trying to tame everything. Things do look a lot more blown out, and again, it just seems as though the S9 Plus struggles to get more light in, even though it has its variable aperture, whereas the P20 Pro just seems to do it with ease. Now I do just want to touch on the video that both of these cameras are capable of shooting at. Now overall I do think the S9 Plus does present a warmer video that is more visually appealing in my opinion. It also does tame the light a bit better in this situation, especially on the right hand side. The stabilization on the S9 Plus was also handled slightly better in my opinion, whereas the P20 Pro was a bit more shaky than I'd like it to be. And also the added option of being able to record in 4K at 60 frames per second will really be the winner for some people, especially me, whereas the P20 Pro can only record at 4K at 30 frames a second. Now that just means that the video on the S9 Plus will just be a lot more buttery smooth than it will be on the P20 Pro, and also it is just nice to have the option if you want it. What is my opinion on both of these phones, and which one is the winner, which one should you get? So overall I do think the P20 Pro excels all round. Now the P20 Pro did hold up throughout the entire day, and for me it was definitely the most consistent of the two cameras. The S9 Plus really did compete with the P20 Pro when we were shooting during the daylight hours, but when the sun started to set, the P20 Pro really came into its own. And as you could see towards the end, the S9 Plus really does struggle in some low light instances, even though it has its variable aperture, and this was something that Samsung really did tout as being able to get you some really good nighttime shots. Now, it's not to say the S9 Plus takes bad shots, it's just the P20 Pro really does excel in low light, and in some instances I was completely blown away by how much detail was retained, even when there was very, very little light. And so yeah, overall I do think the P20 Pro is certainly more of a consistent camera system, and it's also worth noting I preferred the viewing experience on the P20 Pro screen over the S9 Plus, which I was quite surprised at. So the S9 Plus does have a 1440p panel, whereas the P20 Pro only has a 1080p display. But throughout the day when we were trying to look at the pictures taken on both, I found that the S9 Plus did have sort of an orange tint to it, which I didn't really like. And the P20 Pro screen, even though it's 1080p, was incredibly vibrant, and I think it was just easier to view. So that is worth noting if you are someone who takes a lot of pictures on their phone and shows them to a lot of people on their phone, rather than putting them on a TV or your laptop and sort of blowing them out. And even though the S9 Plus does do a great job, especially in low light, I do find it hard to recommend, especially when you look at how much detail the P20 Pro is able to retain. So the P20 Pro really does take this round. I do think it is the champion here, but let me know what you think. Sound off in the comments below, and it'd be really great if you could hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Also, I really would appreciate if you give me some feedback on these videos. So I made my S9 Plus video a couple weeks ago, and I would really appreciate some feedback as I'm very new to YouTube, and I'm very new to this whole editing business as well. But overall, I really had a blast putting this video together, and I will see you all in the next one.